Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a theory that's going to ask you to see society not just as a collection of people, but as a single, living, breathing organism. It's a really powerful metaphor, and it might just change how you view everything, from your own family to the entire global economy. So let's just start with that big question, right? The one that's at the very heart of structural functionalism. What if? What if we thought about our entire society not as millions and millions of separate individuals, but as one single living thing? So what exactly is structural functionalism? Well, in a nutshell, it's a theory that sees society as this huge, complex system where all the different parts have to work together just to keep things stable. We're going to think less about individual choices and more about the big structures, government, family, education, and the specific jobs they do to keep the whole machine humming. Okay, so here's our game plan. First step, we'll really dig into that living body metaphor. Then we'll meet the so-called doctors who first diagnosed society this way. After that, we'll look at the good and, well, the not-so-good functions they found. We'll also see why the theory eventually got a lot of pushback. And finally, we'll check for a pulse and see if it's still relevant at all today. All right, let's get right into that central metaphor. This whole idea was really championed by a British philosopher, Herbert Spencer, who came up with this pretty radical new way to picture the world around us. What Spencer argued was that, you know how our bodies have organs? A heart that pumps blood, lungs that take in air? Well, he said society has social institutions that do the exact same thing. They perform these vital functions. The economy, for instance, produces all the goods we need. The family raises the next generation. Education passes on knowledge. Every part has a crucial job to do to make sure the whole thing survives. So, who were these first doctors to use this analogy to diagnose society? Well, one of the most important thinkers here was a French sociologist named Émile Durkheim. He took this basic idea and really fleshed it out into a full-blown theory. You see, Durkheim was absolutely obsessed with one question. In a world that was changing so fast, with industrialization and all that, what was the social glue that was holding everything together? He called this social solidarity, and he really believed that if you could understand that, you could understand society itself. And Durkheim came up with two main answers. He said that back in pre-industrial times, you had what he called mechanical solidarity. This was a social glue based on sameness. People did the same kind of work, had the same beliefs, the same traditions. But in modern societies, he saw something else, organic solidarity. And here, the glue is actually our difference. Think about it. We're all specialists now. We're doctors, farmers, programmers, and we absolutely need each other to survive, just like the organs in a body all depend on one another. Now, this theory got a really big upgrade around the middle of the 20th century, thanks to an American sociologist named Robert K. Merton. He kind of looked at the early functionalists and thought, this is a little too simple. He felt we needed a much more complex way to diagnose society. Merton's really key insight was that pretty much every social structure has two types of functions. First, you've got the manifest function. That's the obvious intended purpose. So the manifest function of going to college is, well, to get an education and skills, right? But then there are the latent functions. These are the unintended, kind of hidden side effects. At college, you also build a social network. You might meet your future partner. You learn how to live on your own. These aren't the official goals, but they are incredibly important functions nonetheless. And Merton also brought in this super important idea of dysfunction. He pointed out that, hey, not every part of society works perfectly. Some social patterns can actually be harmful and mess up the whole system. A practice might even be functional for one group of people, but really dysfunctional for another. And that's where you get tension and instability. This all led to his famous theory about why people break the rules. Merton said, look, society gives us all these goals, like becoming wealthy, but not everyone has the same legitimate means to get there. This creates strain, and that leads to 5 possible ways people respond. Most of us just conform, but some innovate. They find new and sometimes illegal ways to succeed. Others become ritualists, just going through the motions without really believing in the goal. Some people retreat from society entirely, and then a few rebel, trying to tear down the system and build a new one. For decades, functionalism was really the dominant way of thinking in American sociology. But then came the 1960s, a decade of protest and huge social upheaval, and the theory came under some serious fire. Critics started offering a very, very different diagnosis of the social body. These critics basically argued that this whole healthy body metaphor was a dangerous fantasy. They asked, where's the conflict in this picture? Where's the inequality? Functionalism, with its laser focus on stability, didn't really have a good answer for power struggles over class or race or gender. By always looking for order and balance, critics said the theory just ended up justifying the way things are and completely ignoring the voices of people who were being oppressed. Yeah, this quote really gets to the heart of the problem. If society is always trying to stay in perfect balance, how on earth do you explain something like the civil rights movement or a political revolution? Those things aren't about stability. They're about radical, messy, disruptive change. And for that, functionalism just didn't have a good answer. So, with all these devastating critiques, you'd think the theory just died right there on the operating table. But did it? Let's check for a pulse. And yeah, as a grand theory that explains everything, functionalism definitely fell out of favor. It was pretty much replaced by other theories that paid way more attention to conflict, power, and individual experiences. But its pulse never totally flatlined. That core idea, that to understand something in society, you should ask what function it serves, is still incredibly useful. I mean, this kind of logic is a cornerstone of evolutionary biology and anthropology, and you can hear its echo anytime someone asks, hey, what's the purpose of this tradition? Or how does this institution actually benefit society? And maybe that's the theory's real lasting legacy. It forces us to take that metaphor and apply it to our own world and ask some really tough questions. If our society is a body, what parts are working well? And for who? What parts are causing harm? And maybe the most important question of all, who gets to be the doctor who makes that diagnosis? Now that is a question worth thinking about.